Mr. Westmoreland.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Let me say, you know, the first panel we talked about unintended consequences, and Mr. Roberts, you hit the nail on the head with your testimony about being the victims of somebody else doing some wrong things in the banking industry. And you understand that our concern about some of these new agencies that are created, we don't know what the rules and regs are going to be. And that is basically what has happened with some of the legislation that we've passed recently, not knowing how the regulators are going to go out into these banks and enforce certain regulations that Congress really does not have any control over. And I know from talking to some of my independent bankers and community bankers that how many sets of regulators, Mr. Roberts, does a typical bank have in Virginia? Are you in Michigan or Virginia?
I'm in Virginia.
Virginia.
We are, again, with a dual banking system. We are a state-chartered bank that happens to also be a member of the Federal Reserve System. We are regulated by the Commonwealth of Virginia, and we're also regulated by the Federal Reserve.
And you also, so how many sets of regulators do you have come in?
We will have in any particular year at least 2 examinations. One would be a safety and soundness examination by either the state or the Federal Reserve. The second would be a consumer affairs examination that is solely looking on our adherence to consumer protection laws. That is done by the Federal Reserve. I think it was stated earlier in this testimony that I fully believe that the prudential regulator, the one who has responsibility for safety and soundness, ought to have responsibility for consumer affairs. I would also share with the committee, about 6 weeks ago, we just completed a consumer affairs examination by the Federal Reserve. Prior to that examination, we received a questionnaire from the Federal Reserve, probably 45, 50 pages long, requesting a number of documents as well as questions. We had 14 examiners come into our bank for 2 weeks to review all of those issues that they thought might have arisen through that pre-questionnaire. I would suggest to you that it was a very extensive, fully completed examination that is entirely separate from safety and soundness.
And on top of that, we had another knee-jerk reaction kind of thing in Congress actually before I got here, Sarbanes-Oxley. Could you tell me, due to that knee-jerk reaction, how much that costs the average bank? I know you said your FDIC premiums went from 75 to 500 and something. What kind of cost and what kind of audit does the Sarbanes-Oxley law bring to the banking business?
We have done regular reviews of the cost of Sarbanes-Oxley at our bank. The cost year in and year out approaches $250,000 to $275,000. We have right at 2.5 million shares of stock outstanding. I've shared with my shareholders at annual meetings. The cost is about 10 cents a share. If you were at a trading volume of 10 times earnings, that's going to be $1 a share. If you're at 16 times earnings, that's $1.60 a share that takes place year in and year out. And I would suggest to you my shareholders hardly see the benefit of that reaction.
Thank you. Mr. Maloney, when we talk about things being under-regulated, you know, we had the credit default swaps, which, if I understand correctly, is a company that was offering insurance on something that they was selling that wasn't regulated to offer insurance, so they came up with a product called a credit default swap. Is that basically what that is in a common language?
I'm not qualified to answer that.
Okay. Well,
it's an element, excuse me, it's an element that our firm was never involved with.
There's somewhere down the line with a credit default swap and all these derivatives and stuff that, to me, somebody that was, you know, these companies are regulated. The SEC or somebody should have caught this And I don't know if it was under-regulation or the lack of enforcement in people wanting to expose some of these programs that were out there. But the problem that we're having, and I'm in Georgia, and we've had more failed banks, I think, than anywhere else. And what's happening is, and Mr. Roberts, you spoke of this, the regulators are coming in and changing the way some of these banks that had a good business going on are able to lend money, how much cash reserve they've got to have versus how much money they're able to lend, reduction in real estate portfolios that are performing assets, but they're wanting them reappraised, more cash put in the deal, and it's really a snowball effect. And Madam Chair, I'll yield. I know I've taken more time than I like, but I would like to have at least maybe one more round of question, and if that's possible, but I'll yield back to you. From what I see, the problem is that there are, and Mr. McPhee, being a community banker, I'd like to hear from you too, because what it seems like when we passed the TARP legislation, we were told that this was going to be used to free up the credit market. And it has had, to me, just the opposite effect on freeing up the credit market. It has almost created a snowball effect on real estate values, what is going on in the marketplace, and the banks that did get the TARP money are using this just to straighten up their books. And if you look at Goldman Sachs and the Bank of America talked about they made billions of dollars, they were able to buy these assets for 10 or 20 cents on the dollar and then sell them for 30 or 40 cents on the dollar. So they really did have a value there. But to clean up their books and to do what some of these regulators were making them do, people were losing their retirements, they were losing their equity, they were losing all the cash that they had put in the deal now that they can no longer get it out. And so it's had just a reverse effect on that. And that's what concerns me about some of this big legislation that we're talking about, is some of these unintended consequences of possible rules and regs that can be written and enforced by some agencies that we really have no control over. And could you comment on some of that?
Yes, thank you. I'm no expert on TARP. I do know that at the time that TARP was put into place and the institutions that were qualified for and took TARP, that it was an important step in reassuring the public that the financial institution system of this country was going to go on. So I don't fault them for that. I think that there's being from a community bank, we're a $77 million bank. I have 13.7% Tier 1 capital and 22% liquidity. It's not a model you see very often today. When the others were paying out 75% in dividends and retaining 25%, our model was the opposite. We were paying out 25% and retaining 75%. Not saying that we're right and they're wrong, but there was a happy medium in there where I think both the unregulated and the systemically risky, which I would define as those banks over $100 billion that could wreak havoc on the society again, really did need that TARP money to prop up the view of whether or not they were going to survive through this crisis. The community banks today, I can tell you, are willing and ready to loan. I have money. Unfortunately for me, I live in a state where the employment is so high that I've seen loan volume that you might see in other areas.
We'll open you a branch up down in Georgia, I promise you. We got some borrowers.
Yes, sir. I know about Georgia.
We got some borrowers in there. One thing for the credit union that I'd like to ask you, you don't belong to the FDIC, right?
Correct. We are regulated by NCUA.
Right. What kind of fees do you pay them for your deposits?
On average, I have at least one NCUA exam a year. On average, it might be $1,000 or $1,500 is what it might cost me. Doesn't seem like a lot of money, I'm sure. However, I have 7 employees, including myself, 6 full-time